So maybe if they were to present the evidence or the facts in a different way, then they, to say that, okay, here is what we know. This is this is the fossil record. These are phylogeny and the genetic thing, and what we think is that all this I guess the theory of evolution, or how scientists describe the theory of evolution, is it's kind of an explanation to describe the evidence. Now, maybe it's not always portrayed that way in science classrooms. It's
remember I told you about the playing field? Anything outside that playing field is regarded as irrelevant. In that playing field, there are allowable evidences. Let me tell you what's outside the playing field. I'm trying to explain the origin of man, but I'm not allowed to explain why people all over the world have religion. Why not? That's evidence. If I'm explaining where man came from, religion is evidence, right? If I'm looking for the origin of man, why can't I talk about morality? Because morality is what people do, right? So therefore, when the scientist says, we're only going to talk about chemistry, okay, you talk about chemistry. Please don't tell me you're talking about the origin of life or the meaning of life. You are fooling yourself. You're doing exactly what a policeman does, who says, well, look, here's a square playing field. I can book anybody except for politicians.
Yeah, well, so kind of, would it be fair to say then that you are in disagreement with the current definition of science almost
Definitely.
as a natural?
Yeah, definitely.
So you would like to see that broadened or done, like where would maybe philosophy or religious classes come into play then? Where would you delineate between science
remember
and
I said the problem with modern education is specialisation? It shows up in the absurdity where you go and you do English and you're supposed to learn to spell, and then the science teacher says, oh, you don't have to spell correctly in science. Well, I'm sorry, scientists have to communicate, so they need to spell correctly. It may not be the central theme, neither is philosophy. But you can't think unless you have a philosophical framework. Thinking just doesn't happen, right? You have to teach kids, no, look, sorry, that is a stupid, illogical thought. Why is it a stupid, illogical thought? Look what you've done. Right? So they have to do a bit of philosophy. With all of my classes that I've taught over the year, I make sure they know the history of scientific thinking. Remember that bit we did about why did the Greeks put the fossils back down? Because of their religion. They were just as logical as we are, but their logic started in a different place. They were just as smart as we are, but you start in the wrong place, your right logic will lead you to a wrong conclusion. So you have to know all of those things, not just naturalistic explanations without reference to God. That is totally brainwashing a nation to be atheists or agnostics.
Right. So how would you, if you could change the curriculum, how would you do that? How would you go about changing? Like, should we have private schools that kind of teach whatever that particular group that funds them wants? Should we have a public system that would kind of come to a consensus to teach kids? Should we, or I think in Canada right now we have some private schools. I know we have Christian schools, and I actually went to a Christian school growing up for a little while, and there was no problem talking about theology and creationism in Christian schools. But now you come to the public school where you kind of have a melting pot of different religions and cultures, and you can't, how do you teach one view of creation without teaching the other one, kind of thing. So.
Okay, you will find in education, the people in charge who provided the money have always decided what the playing field is. Doesn't matter whether it's public education, right? The politicians know, okay, we've taken the money off the public. There's too many of them. They'll fight. You can't have a committee with 1 million people on, so we'll make the decision. So if they're an atheistic group, they will make an atheistic decision. That's just the way the game is played. But here in Canada, you may remember, education used to be defined as public or private, but it meant something totally different. Public education was Protestant. Private education was largely Catholic. Okay, that's because that's how society was structured. Now you have in charge people who are largely non-Christian in their thinking, so public education has to be non-Christian. The choices are made, right? If you want to go into that system and you're somebody like me, then you have to say, how do I skin this cat in a way that I'm still alive at the end of the day? And it can sometimes be a bit tricky. So I wouldn't go into a public school classroom and say, okay, open your Bibles at.
Right.
But I will go into a public school classroom and say, okay, here is your textbook on the evolution of mankind. why do we call ourselves mankind? And the kids will look at you stupid, and I'll say, okay, I'll open my Vedas from India, and here's a story. The world was flooded. Only one person, Manu, survived that, and his 7 spiritual helpers, and we're all descended from Manu, so we take his name. Have you heard a story about a worldwide flood? Oh, yeah. That's why your textbook says mankind. Now, they need to know all that stuff. Of course, then they, as students who have more rights than teachers, will start to say, how did Noah fit dinosaurs on the ark?
Right.
And now I'm entitled to answer questions.
Gotcha, okay. All right, we're kind of running out of time here, so I want to kind of touch...
Fun though, isn't it?
It is, this is a good conversation. Wish we had more time. What are your views on global warming?
Okay, well, when all this furor about climate change and global warming first started to hit the fan, 5-6 years ago, and really taken off in the past couple of years, Al Gore's movie, Nobel Prize, etc., I scratched my head and thought, I remember doing a course on geoclimatology in university in Queensland, Australia, and they told us the climate's gone up and down based on the fossil evidence alone. So I went and got my textbooks out and thought, I wonder if this is still regarded as valid. And sure enough it is. The logic's simple. If you have crocodiles in the world today and it's warm, you find a fossil crocodile, you assume it's been warm, right? You find a polar bear, it's cold, you find a fossil polar bear, you assume it's been cold. And on that basis, the climate's gone up and down and up and down. I mean, like, we were out in the field the other day and there's heaps of glacial boulders around this town. Okay, evidence is the glaciers were here. It was colder. And they went a long time ago, long before motor cars and flatulent dairy cows, right? Long before Al Gore and politics. So much of what we're hearing is political rubbish.
So this is a natural cycle that we're going through?
It's certainly a cycle, and it's gone up and down quite a few times. Like you go into the oil sands, and you have tropical creatures, right? So it's a cycle. So
it was warmer here at one time.
It was warmer here, and then it was colder. Now it's warmer.
Okay, so... Do you think scientists, or do you think, what do you think about stewardship then? Do we have any responsibility to do anything about, well, I guess you said it's probably not man-made, it's likely just a natural cycle, so...
Well, you're using your background Christian philosophy when you raise words like stewardship. You'll find in your Bible, it talks about God giving us dominion over the planet. In other words, we became the prince of the earth. If a prince wants to run his little kingdom responsibly, he can actually make sure it functions to his own benefit. You could do 2 things. If you're in charge, you can go and chop down all the trees and rape the planet, and you'll be dead in 50 years because there's no more oxygen, there's no more shade, the planet dries out, you're in serious trouble. On the other hand, if you chop down a tree, you can plant 3, and then you'll always have enough trees. So one is dominion, the other is stewardship. The 2 are related, but what we're facing at the moment is that in the evolutionary world, they no longer believe man is in charge. So therefore, they want to have only stewardship. Now, what you find is that dominion without stewardship becomes rape of the planet. Stewardship without dominion becomes nature worship. And in the end, you bite your own nose off. We've seen it forever and a day in some countries where you can't even hit the mosquitoes, right, because of your false religious view about that mosquito being your late Uncle Charlie. So you end up killing yourself with your false view of worship of nature.
I think the Jains are an example of that. They don't believe
in that's right.
anything. Okay, so kind of along that vein, should scientists work on technologies to try and regulate climate, do you think? Because I've heard a few climatologists propose kind of radical ideas to cool the earth.
Yeah, you will find that scientists are always coming up with ideas as to how they can get their technology copyrighted and make a fortune. I think the nature of man is that we are creative because we're made in God's image, and if we even perceive a problem, we set out to solve it. Right? I've got no problem with that sort of technology invention, but what it needs, of course, is to realise that we've been doing this for 2,000 years and we still can't get tomorrow's weather accurate, right? Let alone change it. So the 2 things are poles apart. The Chinese, of course, are planning to try and make sure it's dry for the Olympic Games. So they're spending gazillions of dollars on silver iodide and dumping it. Well, we know that if you put silver iodide on clouds, the clouds fall down. But I've got a cheaper suggestion. Hold the Olympic Games in the dry season, right? That would be a much smarter use of funds, etc.
Right.
I think in the end, our technology, our imagination is greater than what anything our technology can achieve at present.
Okay.